Hello everyone, this is Frau. I'm the German teacher at Nolan.
And this is Frau Burau, the German teacher at Bishop Lynch.
Today we're going to tell you just an overview of German history, a very cursory look at it, because Germany is a country that is very influenced by its past, and so in order to understand what Germany is today, who the Germans are, and where they are going, we need to look at where they came from. So, back to the beginning. You know the Roman Empire. Well, when the Roman Empire was destroyed, it was the Germans. The barbarians who came from the area we now know as Germany, the Germanic barbarians, overran the Western Roman Empire and caused the collapse of Western civilization as we knew it at the time, leading to several centuries of relative chaos in Western Europe. However, also leading to Charlemagne. He's known as Charlemagne in France and Karl der Große, Karl the Great, in Germany. And he is claimed by both Germany and France as one of the founding figures of that area. If you look at this empire, of all the colors of the Königreich, his empire, you can see that it encompasses modern-day France and modern-day Germany. Another interesting thing about this map is you can see that Karl really captured a lot of this area, but Germany from this point on really developed very differently than other countries such as England, France, and Russia in Europe. In England, France, and Russia, a strong monarch came in and centralized power far earlier than happened in Germany. For a very long time, Germany was just a patchwork of tiny little countries who were kind of like, they had relationships with each other, and they were kind of German, and they had this language and this culture that they shared, but really it was just this patchwork. And a lot of that had to do with the laws and the rules in Germany and the custom for passing on property to children. So in other areas in Europe, usually the father would pass on his property to his oldest son. In Germany, it was always split among sons. So even here, you can see in Charlemagne's great area that it was split. That's what the different colors are here, is how it became split among his sons and grandsons. And here's a map of medieval Germany. You can see this patchwork of places. It was not Germany. We refer to it as Germany just as a shorthand, so we know what geographical area we're talking about, but there was no Germany at this point.
When I say, I'm German, I'm actually what was part of Prussia, so it's not even modern-day Germany. So.
Yeah, and my German roots go back to what is currently the Czech Republic, but at the time that my family came over to the U.S., it was part of the Austro-Hungarian Empire. So, yeah, now they speak Czech there, not German. All right, then we had this, fairly important figure named Martin Luther, who in the year 1517 posted his 95 Theses on the church door in Wittenberg. You can see on the map where Wittenberg is. This is in northeastern Germany, which will be important later. So Luther, of course, started the Protestant Reformation, which tore apart really all of Europe. Started in Germany. Hooray, Germans.
Die Reformation.
Yes, the Reformation. So after a while of arguing with each other and with Luther and going back and forth on this, and not getting any resolution, the Europeans started what is called the 30 Years' War from 1618 to 1638. 1618 to 1648. And this was a very bloody war, and it mainly happened within Germany, and so there was a lot of destruction in Germany. You can see in this picture a representation of it. However, the 30 Years' War really didn't decide anything, and so at the end of the 30 Years' War, it was just ensconced in law that whoever ruled an area, and remember, Germany was made up of hundreds of different little areas, whoever ruled, that was the religion of his subjects. So if the prince of your area was Catholic, then you were Catholic too. If he was Protestant, and in Germany, when we say Protestant, we really mean Lutheran. If he was Protestant/Lutheran, then you were too. Same thing with Calvinism, which also had somewhat of a hold in Germany. Here you can see a map of religious affiliations in Germany at the end of the 30 Years' War, 1648. So the green is Catholic, yellow is Lutheran, and purple is Calvinist. So this does not exactly correspond to a map of Germany today. This is the wider German-speaking area, including a lot of Austria-Hungary. And if you think about it, Austria-Hungary is all Catholic, and South and West Germany are all Catholic. North Germany is largely Lutheran and Calvinist, and that is something that continues today. If you are in Austria or Bavaria, you cannot walk, it feels like 10 feet without running into a Catholic church. When I studied abroad in Austria, I was in a town of about 250,000 people, and there were literally more than 50 Catholic churches, 50, and there were 3 Protestant churches.
Yeah, most of my time has also been in southern Germany, so more Catholic churches, and also the festivals and holidays that are more have a Catholic slant to them as well.
Yeah, it's part of the culture in a way that we really don't see here in the States, which has much more of a Protestant Puritan background. And there's statues of Mary everywhere.
That's right.
Which is
things
not
named after Mary.
Yep. Yeah, everything's about Mary. The Mariensäule and Marienplatz in Munich. It's all about Mary. Okay, so we've been alluding to the Austro-Hungarian Empire, which of course was centered on Austria, and the Habsburgs. You may have heard of them in your history studies. Austria-Hungary was a hugely dominant force throughout much of European history. At this time, from around Charlemagne to now is in the 1800s, this was the first empire, the Holy Roman Empire, which, as we say, was neither holy nor Roman nor an empire, but it was the Holy Roman Empire, the Heiliges Römisches Reich, and that was the first Reich. We hear of the Nazis as the Third Reich. There were obviously 2 that came before them. This was the first one. And it ended, dun dun dun, with Napoleon.
Bonaparte.
Always the French. France and Germany tend to butt heads a lot. This is one example. Napoleon came in and dissolved the Holy Roman Empire. He did a lot of restructuring, a lot of things that Germans resented. But he also did put in some infrastructure and governmental changes that really helped bring Germany, which at the time was not exactly backwards, but remember, we're still talking about a patchwork, right, of little duchies and provinces and everything, whereas in France you have Napoleon, right, who had all of France under his thumb and was also conquering lots of other places. Would never, ever have happened in Germany at this point because you only had your little patchwork that you were ruling over.
No one emperor.
Nope, no one emperor. So Napoleon dissolved the Holy Roman Empire in 1806. So from this point on, the other countries in Europe had really started centralizing power, and it became clear to everybody that this was going to happen in Germany as well. The question was, how exactly was that going to happen? Because, right, there wasn't a Germany, so who exactly are we even talking about when we talk about the Germans creating a German empire, a German nation? So this question, which was called the German question, die Deutsche Frage, preoccupied a lot of Europe for much of the 19th century. And the question was, out of all of these German-speaking people, who gets to be in this presumptive German state? If you look at this map, the dark blue is Prussia. So Prussia was in North Germany, and Prussia, as you can see, had gained a lot of power, a lot of land. So Prussia was vying for control of this German state. If you think about it, whichever group had the power when they created the German state was going to get to write the rules. What is the German state going to look like? Who is going to have power? How are they going to get that power? Most likely, if you're in charge when you're making those decisions, you're the one that has the power. So Prussia wanted the power. The yellow that we see is the Austro-Hungarian Empire. Also large, also powerful, and they wanted the same thing. They wanted to have that power. Now, when we look at that yellow section and the blue section as well, that entire section was not German-speaking. If you look at the red outline, that's more or less showing us the German-speaking areas. So Austria-Hungary in particular owned a lot of land that was not German-speaking, which caused all sorts of problems, as you can imagine, when you're trying to rule over a multilingual group of people. But they were specifically looking at the German-speaking part of Austria-Hungary. And the gray was a series of independent German states that the biggest one that we see is Bavaria. They're right in the middle, just to the north and west of Austria. So the question was, who was going to be in charge and who all got to be included in this new Germany? The Germans decided this through a series of 3 wars that they fought, which basically, although they weren't fighting each other directly, the real power struggle was between Prussia and Austria-Hungary. Again, they didn't fight each other directly, but in the end, Prussia won. And as you know, Austria is not part of Germany, and this is why, because Prussia beat them out. So, the German state that was created, here's the wars. Yes, wars, people dying. Independence being created, and countries. Great. So here is the Second German Reich. So we had the first one, the Holy Roman Empire. This is the second one, the Second German Empire, which is mainly just called the German Empire. And this is the map. So you can see that the Austrian Empire and Hungary are not part of it, but it does include that huge section of Prussia that is no longer part of Germany. So if this map looks weird to you, that's probably why. Because it includes a lot of what is now Poland. You can see in green there in the middle, that's Bavaria. They maintained some special privileges when they became part of Germany. And they still know it.
I was going to say, and they still feel that today.
Yeah. I like to say that Bavaria is the Texas of Germany.
Very much so.
This is only one reason, because just as Texas used to be an independent state, so did Bavaria. And when it became part of Germany, they maintained some of that. Yes. As far as the people go, on the left we have Otto von Bismarck, who was the military leader who was largely responsible for the Wars of Unification. And on the right is Emperor Wilhelm I. Okay, so as you know, we are getting into the 20th century and we have World War I. So all of Europe was engaged in this really complicated tangle of alliances, and if somebody declares a war on you, then I will declare war on them, and so on and so forth. So in the end, Germany goaded Austria to declare war. And when Austria declared war, then Germany declared war, and then all these other countries also declared war because of the alliances that they had. A lot of people say, including the Europeans at the time, that this was all Germany's fault, which to a certain extent, yes, they were the ones that goaded Austria to declare war. However, most historians say that if they hadn't done it, somebody else would have, and the war at that point was fairly inevitable. World War I was incredibly destructive. It was called the Great War at the time for everybody in Europe, and it was bad. So after World War I, Germany was considered to blame by most of the Europeans, and so they decided that in order to prevent something this terrible from ever happening again, they were going to require Germany to pay enormous sums of money. The idea was to make up for the loss of life and destruction of property that Germany had created. But the idea was also basically to cripple Germany, to make sure it had no power, no military, no economic basis, so that Germany could never become so powerful again. So while we have, in some ways here, the Roaring Twenties like we had in the US, and this coming technology and everything, we also had some very serious problems in Germany. So those reparation payments that the Germans had to be making to the other European countries were seen by Germans as just impossible and unfair. So many of the Germans were actually very angry with their own government for agreeing to pay these. So you have this new government, it's a republic, which Germany had never had a republic before. In a republic, the people have representation, as opposed to just having an emperor who is making all the decisions. And so Germans were looking at this government and saying, well, we have this free, independent government, and they make terrible decisions, like allowing us to pay these reparations. We had this runaway inflation.
the runaway inflation, meaning that the money wasn't worth anything, and as you can tell by the graph, that was true, and people could go ahead and just use it as paper and wallpaper and wheelbarrows full of it, pushing it down the gutters and the streets because it wasn't worth literally like the paper it was printed on.
Yeah, like kids played with the money as toys because it was so worthless.
Making kites.
They made kites out of money, which I'm sure you can't even imagine doing. Thankfully, because we do not have this level of hyperinflation. So as you can imagine, when you literally have to take a wheelbarrow to take all the money that you need to the store in order to buy a loaf of bread, this does not create a very peaceful society. There was a lot of anxiety, a lot of anger, and a lot of violence. And the people were looking around and they were saying, we have this new Republican government and it cannot control this country. It's violent. We can't afford anything. There's so much unemployment. We're in this impossible situation with reparations. What we need is a strong leader, somebody who can get us out of this, who can stand up for us as Germans and make our situation better. And that is exactly what Adolf Hitler promised to do. So the Germans were looking for a savior, and Hitler promised them this, and so many of them went along with him. Hitler's original center of power and the Nazi Party's original center of power was actually Munich in southern Germany. They first tried to take over the German government in 1923, didn't work, but in the 1930s they were able to come to power in 1933. So here we can see a shot. Obviously this is very impressive. There's a reason for that. This is definitely propaganda. It's taken from a film that was a propaganda film for Germany, but these are the actual Nazis at a Nuremberg party rally. So the Germans fought World War II. You probably learned a lot about World War II in your history class and the Holocaust, so I won't spend a lot of time on it right now. But some things that aren't covered so much in your history class is just knowing that Germany itself was very heavily bombed and destroyed. So when you go to visit Germany today, especially if you're in a major city, chances are most of that city was actually bombed out. But for the most part, Germans have rebuilt those cities. So that's great. So here we can see a picture of the Reichstag, the Parliament building, today in the bottom left corner, and in May of 1945, at the end of World War II. As you can see, it has been destroyed, and much of Germany looked the same way. In Germany, this time period in 1945 is called the Stunde Null, the 0 hour, the time when you just have this utter destruction. Most of the men have been killed or are political prisoners in Russia, prisoners of war. And so you just primarily have a collection of women, children, and old men who are too old to fight, who are suddenly looking at their completely destroyed cities without any sort of government and saying, we have to rebuild now. What are we going to do? So what happened was the Allies who had fought against Germany divided Germany among themselves into occupation zones to create some form of governance until Germany got back on its feet enough to govern itself. So you can see in 1945, you had the Soviet Union, France, the US, and the UK. So Germany was divided, Austria was divided, Berlin was divided, and Vienna, which is the capital of Austria, was also divided. By 1949, the Allies felt like the Germans had recovered enough that they could take over their own governance. A footnote to that would be that they spent a lot of this time trying to make sure that people who had been committed Nazis were not put back into posts of government, but you did have this problem that the only people that had experience governing were ex-Nazis. So, in a lot of cases, people who had been Nazis really ended up back in their old posts, just because they didn't have anyone else who could do it. So 1949, we had the creation of West Germany and East Germany. Why 2 countries and not 1? Because by this point, the whole world was starting the Cold War, which, as you remember, was primarily fought between the US and the Soviet Union, but with lots of other states taking sides. and Germany was literally a front line. So if you think about the division of Germany in 1945, you had a Soviet part and an American part. So those two parts were not going to come together. The Soviets specifically were not going to relinquish their control of it, and so they created East Germany instead of creating one unified Germany. So East Germany became part of the Soviet bloc of states, so it was communist, and West Germany became part of the Western world. They had a representative government. The capital of West Germany, interestingly, was moved out of Berlin. Why? Because Berlin was square in the middle of East Germany, and that just seems a little uncomfortable and not very practical.
They would have been surrounded.
Yeah, very literally surrounded. So they moved to Bonn. I think I have a map, yes. Here you can see Berlin, there in the middle of East Germany, and Bonn in West Germany. Interesting, Bonn is not really a city that you would think of as the capital of a major European country. And they wanted it that way because they wanted it to be a city that didn't make sense as a capital because they wanted everybody to see it the whole time as temporary. They knew that the real capital should be Berlin, and they didn't want the capital to accidentally end up staying Bonn. So Bonn was the capital during this period of time. So by the early 1950s, West Germany had experienced what they call an economic miracle. If you remember, after World War I, Germany was having to pay these intense reparations, and that in large part led to all of the trouble that allowed for the rise of the Nazi Party. So part of the reason for that, right, the reason the reparations had been given was because the other European countries did not want World War I to happen again. Well, now we had another world war, and they said, well, we really don't want that to happen again. And they looked at the causes of it, and they saw that those very high reparations was part of the cause. And so they took the opposite approach this time. And Germany had a very good economic recovery. In part, the U.S. gave Germany a lot of money to help recover, and in part, Germans just work really hard. So this picture kind of, this is a picture of the VW Bug. And this kind of captures the spirit of the Wirtschaftswunder, the economic miracle, this like buckling down and working and producing and manufacturing. So West Germany recovered really well. That was not the case in East Germany. Recovery was much slower, and they were largely cut off from Western technology and Western products. In fact, there was such a brain drain. So many people wanted to leave East Germany and go to the West because there were so many more opportunities for especially material goods. So many people were leaving, and they were leaving through West Berlin. What they would do is they would go from East Germany to East Berlin and then cross into West Berlin. And then since West Berlin was technically part of West Germany, just geographically separated from it, people would fly from West Berlin to West Germany, and then boom, they're free, hooray! But the East Germans did not like this, because so many people were leaving, and so they built a wall around West Berlin, and didn't let anybody into it. People still found ways into it, very creatively, like with hot air balloons, or swimming.
Tunnels. Hanging out of windows.
Yes. Yes. Very, very interesting stories. But for the most part, people stopped leaving to go to West Germany. So the Berlin Wall, super interesting. Nobody actually knew that it was going to be built. So it started the night of the 15th of August, 1961, and people woke up the next morning and found all of this barbed wire all around the city. And you can see in this first picture, I mean, these are relatives that they just lived in different neighborhoods. And one neighborhood was in East Berlin and one was in West Berlin. And now this wall was going up, and they might or might not have known it at the time, but they were not going to see each other for another several decades. And some people took that opportunity to escape. The picture on the right is a very famous picture of a soldier, an East German soldier named Konrad Schumann, and he just jumped over the barbed wire. But it's not like it was that easy. I mean, there were guards everywhere. Like, they called out the full military to be lined up all around this area. And very shortly, they began building. You can see in this picture, in the back, there are some workers who are working on building the wall. And in the front, you've got this line of military people to prevent people from crossing. Also note, the Berlin Wall was not just one literal wall. if you were trying to cross it, you couldn't just jump. There was a lot that you had to get through by the time they finished building it. But it didn't last forever. So something amazing happened in 1989, and that was, for the context of this time, the Soviet Union, which of course was like the major power behind the communist bloc, was starting to dissolve, starting to kind of loosen up, lose control. And so the same thing was happening in all of the Soviet satellite states, including East Germany. But there was this crazy series of miscommunications and misunderstandings, and it just led peacefully, amazing, it was peaceful, to the opening of the wall. Nobody expected it.
Yeah.
Just kind of happened.
Kind of based on a television announcement.
Yeah. And people not answering their phones.
Right, that's right.
So here we can see the crossing at Bornholmer Strasse in Berlin, and people just poured through because the wall was open now. This is a very famous picture of people sitting on top of the wall and celebrating because now East and West Germany are reunited finally. So this was 1989, November of 1989.
And as we're looking at that, we're on the west.
Yeah.
So that's also easy access. So a lot of the early graffiti and art started on that side.
Yeah, on the west. So East and West Germany came back together. They became one country. If you think about it, like, there's a whole generation of people who grew up in East Germany with a very different culture from people in West Germany, and now all of a sudden they're becoming one country, and that led to a lot of tension. It wasn't as easy as people thought it would be at first. It had a lot of challenges. There were a lot of stereotypes of people from the East, people from the West. There was a lot of resentment, especially on West Germans, because East Germany was so poor that the West Germans had to send so much money to East Germany just to start to rebuild it, to kind of keep up with or get up to where the West was. There were financial and business challenges. People in East Germany had been guaranteed jobs under the communist system, and now all of a sudden they weren't. They were in this very competitive society, and they had never learned those skills. And also the West dominated culturally, and pretty much anything that had been special about East German culture just kind of disappeared. And you can even see that today. So these maps are not from right after the fall of the wall. They're from 2011, 2013. You can see that income is still far greater in West Germany, and unemployment is greater in East Germany. You can see there are a lot more foreigners in West Germany because they had been open to the rest of the world throughout the Cold War. And partly as a result of that, right-wing extremism is higher in East Germany because they're just not used to dealing with people who are different from themselves. Here's another map that shows you religious divides. So the communists repressed religion, all religion, and so you can see that in the former East Germany, most people are non-religious. We see again the South is largely Catholic, and the North is largely Lutheran, as we had seen earlier. So these are just some examples to show you that the history of Germany has really shaped who Germans are today and the circumstances in which they live. So if you want to learn about the Germans, keep learning about their history.